Today I will be discussing the book Strong Women, Soft Hearts by Paula Reinhardt. In chapter 1 called God Calls Our Hearts, Paula explains that many women opt out for letting go of their passion for life and relationship so that they have less to risk. They build walls instead of bridges, they let their heart shrink on the inside, and the shell grows tough, which was me a long time ago. She goes on to state that the alternative, of course, is to let the pain and loss associated with the world of relationships become a tool in the hand of God, to actually shape a sort of strength of vitality so that we have even more to give. She also explains that the more completely we belong to Christ, the more of our real selves we become. Reclaiming my heart in the sense of owning my longings has been like entering a pantry and finally getting the labels right on the jars. I have God's permission to live out the truth of who I am, to believe that my desires are not an accident, a mistake, or a nuisance. It is the definition of joy to be able to offer back to God the essence of what He placed in you, be that creativity or a love of ideas, or a compassionate heart, or the gift of hospitality. Like I stated in my video about identity, the only identity that matters is our identity as believers of Jesus Christ, not what our society says our identity is. If our sole status on this earth is that we tell others about the love of Jesus Christ and lead them straight into his loving arms, then nothing else on this earth really compares to that. I can say that honestly as I recently led my 5-year-old to Christ, and he now talks about Jesus many times throughout the day and reminds me to pray to God every night before bed. It amazes me the level of love that a 5-year-old can carry. Pain can do a number on our hearts. It's how we choose to handle the pain that will determine whether we harden or soften our hearts towards God. She lists the many faces of pain and how we are affected by each one. She explains the different ways we can lose our heart in our lives. One way that really hit me was pouring acid on hope. She says that it's one way we get stuck in the emotional place of a lost heart. If we can talk ourselves out of hoping, then the pangs of disappointment will miss us too. She quotes another writer with the statement, "Hope is by far the most dangerous commitment we can make in our life." She mentions control as another facet of our lives as strong women. In our society, women who seem to have control are deemed as strong. But in reality, a woman who can release it all to God and trust in Him completely, that is a strong woman. She states that letting go means freedom from the everlasting burden of always having to get our own way. Having to stay in control to get it our own way is indeed an everlasting burden. The next thing a strong woman needs is trust. Paula states that trust hangs somewhere between knowing what your heart longs for and trying to dictate the shape or timing or the outcome of your heart's desire. It lies in the willingness to accept the particulars of how and when and where God chooses to intervene. It waits in the cool shade to surrender. She goes on to say that when you taste a measure of being able to love and enjoy the people in your life without having to have any particular response from them, you are tasting bliss. You can move out into life, and you don't have to have a parking ticket stamped by a human approval to do it. Letting ourselves be loved by God is the place where we stumble upon trust. Another facet to womanhood is vulnerability. This is a tough area for some women. They believe that you can't be a strong woman and be vulnerable. Paula states that you can't really love other people well unless you are at home in your own soul. You will simply be too afraid. I believe that sums up being a woman and accepting who we are before we can love others. You can't love others if you don't love yourself. Or how do you love someone when you don't know what love is? I'm also finding out that the superwoman facade does not exist. If it did, we would be close to perfection and we are nowhere near it. Paula uses this statement. The truth is that none of us can do the superwoman thing all that long before the edges start to fray. One characteristic that is necessary in everyone, not just women, is forgiveness. A question is raised in this chapter. It's very thought-provoking. She asks, have you thought that your willingness to forgive is really your affirmation of the power of God to do you good? I honestly have never thought of it that way. I would like for you to write that question down this week and meditate on it. See how it changes you this week, or maybe even send it to a friend that you may think may need to think about this question. How can we not discuss our sexuality as women? Again, another profound question Paula asks. She asks, how much of a connection is there for you between your spiritual life and your sexual life? Or do those seem like opposite ends of the planet? Ponder that one as well this week. The following statement from the book is one I struggle with, especially after 4 children, but it's very powerful. Physical intimacy cannot be a prize to be earned when one is thin enough or smart enough or good enough. It's meant to be a given. Also stated is something I don't think women really understand, and that is if sex is a problem in a man's marriage, it's not just a problem. It is in his marriage. It means he must not be much of a man. Their sexuality in marriage is tied to their worth as a man. If it's lacking, then he doesn't feel like much of a man and can begin a downward spiral. This is so important for us as strong women to understand and meet that vital need in our husbands. The next component is to live beyond fear. Fear is truly the enemy of passion and a roadblock to the wisdom of God, the roadblock to the wisdom God would give us, as she states. She also states that God knows that the strength that comes from wrestling with our fear gives us wings to fly. We also long for resolution. I love the way she states it here. Life's just a perpetual piecing together of broken bits. There is so much more substance to this book that I wasn't able to include, but I recommend this book for all women to better understand what it means to be a strong woman, yet have a soft heart for God.